Hello and welcome to the WellCare Podcast by Citius Retreats. My name's George Bownes and I'm a sports and exercise medicine consultant and founder of Citius Retreats.
And I'm Nicola Graham, a strategy advisor in human performance.
So before we get into today's show, here's a few words from our kind sponsor, IBSA. Osteoarthritis is the leading cause of pain and disability in the UK. As our bodies age, there is a loss of naturally occurring hyaluronic acid within our joints, which can lead to reduced shock absorption and lubrication. This can contribute to the development of osteoarthritis, resulting in joint pain, stiffness, and difficulty carrying out daily activities, such as going to work and exercising. Synovial HL is a joint injection with the highest concentration of hyaluronic acid available in the UK, effectively restoring hyaluronic acid in the joint. It is scientifically proven to reduce pain and increase joint function, preserving your joint into the future. Synovial HL is injected in a simple procedure which offers an alternative to medication and surgery. If you'd like to find out more, please visit synovial.co.uk for full product information and a list of clinics offering Synovial HL injections. Synovial. Move freely, live fully. Disclaimer. The procedure must be carried out by an appropriately trained healthcare professional.
Welcome to the WellCare Podcast. In this episode, we are joined by Andrew Steele, an Olympian entrepreneur and investor. Andrew's early career was as a professional sprinter running the 400 metres for Great Britain. A serendipitous turn of events led Andrew to become a co-founder of DNAfit. DNAfit grew exponentially, innovating new health technologies, and was acquired by Prenetics in 2018 and listed on NASDAQ in 2022. Andrew has recently launched a new company, Stride, that focuses on personalised vitamin supplements and preventative health intelligence through DNA, gut and blood testing. Andrew is also a founder of SportsFirst VC, who are supporting early-stage athletes on their entrepreneurial journeys. So, Andrew, what does wellness mean to you?
Good question, and thanks so much, guys, for having me. Happy to be here. I'm a little bit of a cynic in terms of like the phrase wellness. I think if I'm going to sort of answer the question directly and jump straight in, I would say that wellness is no different than the word health, and I think too often this weird divide or strange definition between the two, as if you can, I'll do something for my health or I'll do something which is considered wellness, which is not health. And of course, it's exactly the same. It's we tend to think of kind of wellness as like, I'll do some exercise, I'll do some activity, and it may not have a clinical indication from a doctor's point of view, but of course it does. Everyone knows that if you're going to be well, you're going to have to move, or you're going to have to eat well, or you're going to have healthy practices and how you manage your own mental health, etc. And all of these things which we call wellness are just contributing factors to health. So I think it's probably like a more beneficial way to just consider it all one thing, especially as as you two are, and as I am, sort of fans of this sort of proactive, preventative approach to health, that actually causing a gulf between what's considered wellness or what's considered actual healthcare is not necessarily productive. So yeah, the term wellness has been utilized in many different ways, and sometimes to refer to kind of quite sort of odd stuff, and sometimes refer to really sensible things such as moving more, eating better. So I think it's a bit easier for me to just consider it as it's all just one thing, and that's health, basically.
Yeah, Andrew, I think that's so interesting, and I completely agree. I always stayed away from the term wellness in some ways because it just means it's such a wide variety. But actually, when you're seeing people face to face, as I was from a physio kind of clinical perspective, health, wellness, fitness, it was all the same thing. And we were all talking the same language. It's just different people's perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting, right? Like, I mean, naturally, human behavior, you do need ways to sort of define something and draw sort of lines in between two things. But I think as we kind of understand health more nowadays, like the term wellness becomes more and more defunct in my mind. And I also use the word wellness plenty in my own marketing and my own businesses, right? So let's not be too cynical around this. But I think like it's as though to say, well, currently, let's say you went for a full body health checkup with a great doctor like George here, and you had everything done, every possible MRI scan, every possible blood work, every investigation possible, and they said you have no clinical indications of any sort of truly sort of medical issue as far as we consider it in the traditional sense. That then is not to say that you don't need to keep moving, or you don't need to keep having some sort of form of mental health management, whether that's mindfulness or just activity or whatever you do, or these sort of tenets of health, or you don't need to sleep well, and all of those things are what we'd then call wellness. So it's kind of like I do think it's a little bit destructive to delineate between the two, just because of course you are going to continue to manage these other let's say, functional or holistic practices in your life outside of being clinically diagnosed with a traditional disease. So, but it's, even if you were, like, all of those things also matter and support the pathway that you're on as that patient at that point. Anyway, so no, I do think they are both one and the same, and it's quite a healthy thing to not deliberately draw a line between the two.
Yeah, because we're on a continuum all of our lives. It's a journey, isn't it? And different points are more, you lean into different areas of health for whatever reason is going on, but none of it's changed. It's not black and white. It's not I'm healthy, unhealthy. But I think that's probably the distinction now that seems to be coming through in the more commercialization of healthcare, is when there is a disease management or something that it needs to be reacted to from an illness perspective, then the medical community obviously has a massive role. Outside of that, there's a huge realm of now different services, different products, options that are on the market. So when you think about kind of the common themes or how people are trying to improve their health, are there some aspects that are coming through for you?
Yeah, there is. It's an interesting following. So, a little bit of context for the listeners and background. So, obviously, I was an Olympic athlete for most of sort of my early part of my adult life, from a teenager through till I think I was about 32 when sort of I stopped considering myself an active competitive athlete. If I maybe stand to be corrected there, a lot of years have passed since. But so. What after that, I moved into, as you mentioned, so co-founding this business called DNAfit, which we used a home DNA test, so a genomics profile, where we looked at what we'd consider like subclinical health and wellness traits from genomics. So not the traditional use of DNA testing in the old world would be either for full sequencing, for true sort of clinical interpretations, and people suffering from quite serious diseases or needing to understand inherited risks of certain diseases, or then it was very popular at the time to do your genealogical ancestry as well. And we started using that, looking at some of the genetic factors we knew had a role to play in things like the way you metabolize caffeine, or whether you're predisposed to be lactose intolerant, or some things around exercise, stress and sleep, etc. And the interesting thing I learned during that business was, from a purely academic point of view, and this is the case for every bit of health technology, if we talk about wearables, if we talk about any kinds of testing or digital therapeutic apps, is that on an academic point of view, all these things are only useful once you've optimized everything else in your life, right? So you've started walking more, you've started moving more, you're eating better, you've managed your sleep hygiene and your sleeping better. But people tend to not do it that way. And on paper, that the practical way to do it would be that take care of all the things which you don't have to buy anything for, and you can just manage from your own time. And then later on, like an elite athlete, once everything's optimized, then you can do a DNA test or some blood work to do this, and you can measure your sleep stages with a ring or any other wearable or whatever. But people actually do that pyramid the other way around, like in my experience. So from speaking to these thousands and thousands of customers over the years of being in this market, is that what people often need is, they don't find it that exciting to think, well, I'll just go for a walk every day. It doesn't start them on a health journey. And actually, they often need to conversely engage themselves in a health journey by actually going for that almost unnecessarily complicated thing first, and then they backfill the simple, easy to do stuff. So you'll find someone that goes, well, actually, I'm going to buy a Whoop band, and I'm going to measure my sleep stages and my HRV and see all this great data, which from an academic point of view, you would argue is completely unnecessary to that person at that stage in their life. But in reality, they need that first as that sort of interesting hook to create that spark of motivation. And then people backfill these simpler, positive lifestyle changes at the same time from that. So I think we often, you can often get it wrong if you look at things in a too black and white sense and say, well, you don't actually need that. you don't actually need a lot of things in life, the clothes you buy or the computers you use, etc. But often you do that anyway, and then you find these sort of other simpler things to sort of fill the gaps after that. So I think, like, in terms of like the utilization of health technologies or these cutting edge things, or what wellness or health has become nowadays, is you have to think of it in that sort of human behavior ways, that people often need to hook themselves onto something, whether you as a practitioner or an individual might think that's the best first step or not. People find their own first step, and then you need to then support that to sort of help them, fill in the other gaps around that. And a health journey is a squiggly line for everybody, no matter who you are, as an elite athlete or as a person that's just getting off the couch for the first time. And anything you can do to support that, whether you think that's the correct thing or not at that point, is a really helpful thing. So it's a very interesting looking at this, because we used to have a lot of pushback in the early days to say, well, who's this for really? And so, well, on paper it would be for people that are already quite optimized. But actually, the people that were getting the most value out of the technologies I've sort of been in the market for in the last 10 to 12 years are often earlier in that health journey. And then you speak to them years later, and actually it was a spark that started something quite meaningful.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I think that's going back to what we've just been discussing there. What is wellness? What is health? And how do you get people engaged with it? And that, I appreciate what you're saying around what does wellness mean and how do people come across that word, and it means things to different people and yada yada yada. But at the same time, it's getting that hook and having opportunities for people to engage in their health. For some people, they need to think of it in slightly different ways, and it's using that appropriate language for that individual, and then equally those appropriate way accessing into it, if you like. And you're right, yours is more of a I was going to go with top shelf offering, but that might have the wrong connotation. But it's an expensive brass and just leave it there.
Yeah, that's right. It's funny because it's a little bit like sort of being inspired to exercise after watching the Olympics or something. If you're never an exerciser, well, why is that thing with the hardest, most elite part of that to reach for like inspiring? Because that's really far away from where you are if you're just starting healthy. But of course, you need that. You do need that
you need to show
aspirational spark, right? Yeah, or the best trainers. Or whatever.
Exactly. I need those 250-pound night flies with carbon spills because I'm just going to go do my 5K park run.
Yeah, exactly. And of course you don't need that, but actually maybe you do need it from a sort of behavioral point of view to say, actually I find these really cool. These are really cool. I really want to get these.
But it's also
just doing my flip flops. Yeah,
exactly. But it's that piece, isn't it, where it's like, right, I've made this massive financial investment now, and now I need to actually engage with it.
True.
More than just
that's it.
Going for a walk.
Yeah, that's it. And I think that's one part of it. I just, in my experience, I think it's almost like aspiration as opposed to beholding themselves like, well, I've spent this money, so I have to make. I think that's a factor. But I think actually it seems a little bit more positive than that in most people's cases. From in the early days of my first business, I as co-founder did everything, and I ended up speaking to thousands of customers directly, talking them through their product. So it was really great research to find out how people used what we sold at the time, and that influenced a lot and sort of changed my thinking a lot. And people saw it as a very positive thing to have engaged in this, and that might be going for a DEXA scan to understand their body composition, or so anything. It doesn't necessarily about the technologies I've sold, just as any of these health technologies, whether it's wearables or anything like that, is that they often see that as like, wow, I just like the fact they're engaging this thing which they think is cool, and it seems trivial, but actually it's a really powerful motivator. And later on, then of course, they integrate movement and better food into their lives, more organically after that. But anyway, there's lots of roots to it, I think, is the point. And if you just looked at sort of what should be the most obvious like steps or building blocks to health, like people often leapfrog a lot of the early stuff and then come back to the early stuff later,
I think that's one of the most exciting things around working with humans, though, and because you're basically talking about psychology, human behavior, the ability, like we can create, when it comes to kind of businesses or something, you can create a lovely customer journey and nice flowing kind of path and everything. But people do strange things and they deviate away from where, but that is, I think that aspiration aspect is really, really interesting. And there must be a lot around human behavior that then feeds into kind of the marketing and how we start to think about healthcare as it falls more into a consumer market as well. What do people actually want and what do they want to achieve? And how do you then ethically probably balance that with the evidence and the science as well?
Yeah, I think that's right. You just, like, everybody is different. I think aspirational is an often overlooked factor in, like, even public health thinking. If you sort of consider, like, what brands have probably made the biggest impact, if we really looked at it from a sort of meta perspective in terms of like movement, and probably someone like Nike is up there, in terms of, like, actually they've made jogging a thing, right? Originally, right? And
that was their big thing. Phil Knight was all over it,
exactly. But it was never marketed as, like, you're not a movement person, you're not an exerciser, but we'll help you do a little bit. It was like, you're an athlete, and you put it there. And I just
if you've got a body, you're an athlete.
You're an athlete.
That was
right?
it. Yeah.
And everything about it was like elite. Like the technology they used, it was absolutely a product for elite sports people, and it was marketed for Steve Prefontaine, who was the best runner in the US at the time, etc. But it was actually, it created jogging, and it sort of created this movement culture from people that didn't consider themselves athletes, but started to sort of do that because it was aspirational. What it wasn't was, couch to 5K, which is also really useful and brilliant. But can you have like as permeating effect? And I think it'd be really interesting if sort of, public health policies considered what that aspirational part looks like. You do need to make it relatable, of course you do, but I think you can often aim higher than you expect when it comes to your users. And that's one thing I always try to remember is, like, if I look at sort of the battle of wearables, right? Fitbit by no means is a small business, part of Google now, but I think they diluted themselves down too early in their life cycle to, like, hey, we're approachable and it's for everyone. And actually, if they'd been slightly more aspirational of, like, you can be this, you can be up here in this sort of athletic status, as it were, which more like Whoop nowadays I'd consider the main sort of player in the sort of health tracking wearable space. That's what they've done, and they've not watered down that message, but you still, of course, win lots of customers who are only starting on their health journey. I just find it's very interesting from a sort of go-to-market perspective for health brands is to not forget this aspirational piece, that you can probably assume your customers are motivated by a persona that's a few rungs up the health ladder compared to where they are actually at themselves. But I'm into sort of niche marketing speak here. But yes.
No, I think it's really, and I'm just even think as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about, like, when you go to a doctor and they say, how many units of alcohol do you drink? We don't tell the truth. So we're already imposing ourselves in a better health position than we actually are. So the reality is different. But I think there's a lot there to think about from an entrepreneurial kind of health aspect there, from a business point of view as well, of how you communicate with people. It's probably worth then asking, like, you have had, since your elite athlete days, you've had quite an entrepreneurial journey. Are there some kind of big lessons or learnings that you've taken from there that you're now taking into future projects?
Yeah, I mean, so, for a short summary for everyone, as my career ended, as you mentioned, Nicola, I had a sort of serendipitous meeting with a geneticist, and that turned into me finding myself as the founding team of a health tech company. And to be clear, at that point, I had no education. No, I didn't go to university as a result of my athletic career. So I had no higher education. I certainly was not a scientist. I had no work experience. I'd never had a job other than running around in a circle on a track. And I certainly didn't have any cash at the time either. So,
great line.
Entrepreneurism was my only choice, guys. So I was forced into that. But and over the years, I ended up sort of working in this space, which you absolutely couldn't have predicted. And I think I was forced into this corner. And one of the things I've sort of felt throughout my entrepreneurial journey, which has gone from this small bootstrap company to being acquired later on, to then helping lead a very big business through to a huge, IPO on the NASDAQ in 2022, is that, like, you almost don't need to be intimidated by anything ever in life, and you often are. And I have no work experience, no education, absolutely no right to do anything. And the truth is, I think same in sport. Before I got sort of faster in my sort of athletic career, before I reached the Olympics, you always think there's kind of like some level of knowledge that others have that allows them to do something. And there's a mysterious world of, knowledge that you'd be looked down upon if you don't know that and you try to enter that world. And the same in business. Well, I'd never met anyone that was a millionaire at the time, and never met anyone that created businesses worth tens of millions, hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars. And you think, well, once you reach that level, it must be all this mysterious world where everyone knows everything and they only speak in a certain way. So the truth is, nobody really knows. Everyone's doing everything for the first time. Even if they've done it before, it's the first time they've done it the second time. And so you've just got to have this kind of back yourself and have this kind of optimism to like, I'm just going to try this and make my best guess at everything we ever do, and you seek expertise and you seek advice, but ultimately everybody is kind of doing everything for the first time. And I found that quite powerful over the years in terms of, I remember being in a conversation once where someone was talking about a $1 billion valuation on something and thinking, well, I never expected to be in a meeting room like talking about this, and I expected the people that would be talking about this would be sort of these really seasoned financiers in in this sort of like cliche of what you consider people talking about these big numbers. And it was just entrepreneurs trying to make their best guess what consumers need and want and how to make that better and how to make that valuable. And I think like that a lot of that has led me to, and you alluded to one of my more recent ventures, which is SportsFirst. And effectively, this is a venture studio to help people from the sports ecosystem, so either athletes or sports people themselves, or those that were in the sports performance ecosystem, consider that being a founder or an entrepreneurial path is potentially a good option. In my career, I was never really presented with that as an option. I was only presented with very corporate, sort of controlled, staid potential to sort of follow off my sporting career, and that didn't really appeal to me, and it also didn't sort of take advantage of the soft skills I'd acquired through sport. So built SportsFirst to help sort of encourage and foster that spirit of entrepreneurism amongst those from the sports ecosystem, but also hopefully to actually invest and help grow businesses founded by those that come from sport, because I think there's a very rich scene of entrepreneurs in and among sports people because of the character traits that it takes to be a good sports person. They're very hard to learn elsewhere. So that's one of them. And this factor to me is a lot of sports people or people from sport feel quite insecure if they end up in a conversation which is not about sport. I don't know what BCC means or reply all means. I certainly know what all these other acronyms or business jargon come from, and they're super learnable and easy to acquire that knowledge. What's not easy to acquire is kind of the personality traits, the ability to sort of fail as you get in sport and then brush it off and train harder and work better towards the next milestone and keep working on the process that you have that discipline for. Those things are actually really hard to learn, and they're really, really valuable when it comes to founding businesses. So like that same point of like, you should just back yourself and consider that you probably have as good a chance as any at making something successful. Really apply to entrepreneurism and being a founder, and that's been sort of my main takeaway from the last 12 years of moving from being a person that ran around in a circle for a living to running these quite complicated health technology businesses.
I think even as you just talk about like running around in a circle, like you bring it down to realism, as in from the point of view of not potentially putting either people or things on a pedestal, because then like we talk about aspiration in a great way, but also things are achievable. You just have to find the path to get there, don't you? So I think even bringing it down to a relatable level is a massive starting point for people, because we kind of sometimes overestimate what we can do, but we also underestimate what our mind and our body can do from a physical kind of health performance perspective.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, right? I always say my athletic days, and certainly still now, I'm pretty sure that physically I was very not talented, right? Like sort of like I could never, really, really bad flexibility. I wasn't very strong in the weights room. I had like a really high resting heart rate, an awful sort of natural VO2 max. I'm really sweaty. I was not really a gifted like physical talent, right? I won an Olympic medal in a sprint event somehow. But what my talent was I was able to withstand the discomfort of training, I think, better than everybody else. And so my talent was not the traditional, like, considered like physical. I really was not like, people often think I'm being sort of overly, self-deprecating here. I promise I'm not. Is that I'm not that physically gifted, but I was quite psychologically gifted in terms of like ability to just press on through that. And that's just as important. And so, like, I went through so many dark hours of going like, I'm definitely not going to complete this. Or I definitely can't possibly do this like next milestone in my career. And then next thing I knew, I was a national champion, and then I was on the Olympic team, and then eventually that turned into an Olympic medal. And so only now when I look back at that, you realize, I really was capable of putting up with that discomfort, to that level, or achieving that certain thing. And I think when it comes to health, it can seem so intimidating if you think of that kind of end result goal. One of the things in sports psychology, which you always get talked about, is these process goals as opposed to result goals. And I think one of the interesting metaphors for what you guys talk around in this podcast is how that sort of changes people's approach to health and wellness. So, if anyone's not familiar with this, you've got your sort of result goal. My result goal would have been to run 400 meters in a certain time, and run it in a certain thing. But actually, in order to achieve that result goal, what I really need is process goals, which is just turn up every day, do this consistently, be able to execute on this thing 4 times a week or 5 times a week for 6 months and not get injured, etc. And so that's more important than the result goal, is these process goals. And the interesting trend I've noticed in sort of health and wellness nowadays is that I think even not that long ago, 5 or 6 years ago, if you talked about sort of someone, getting into regular exercise, they would talk about a result goal. I want to be able to run a marathon, or I want to be able to run under 30 minutes for 5K or whatever that is. And now it's more a lifestyle choice that you want to show off that you're doing the process. And I think it's a good thing. It's a really healthy thing. People do activity for activity's sake, or eat well for eating well's sake, not to lose weight to a certain point. And they hold themselves to this higher standard as opposed to a goal of like, I exercise regularly, I eat well regularly, I don't drink that regularly, etc. And I think it's far more healthy, and ironically they'll all reach those result goals better. So I think it's a really interesting trend. It's very, very important, and it comes from elite sport. Actually, that's the psychology from sports psychs that you'll do that, but it's super, super impactful.
And then it's obviously got massive repercussions for what you're doing in your space around trying to get athletes at the end of their career to think about being a founder, or at some point during their career about being a founder, and transferring those skills through the work that I've done with your SportsFirst guys so far. We're all learning paddle together, shall we say, and you play a good shot or you play a bad shot, and then the sports guys are going, it's all process though, George, you just got to go with the process. Like, was that the right shot selection? You just let yourself down with the skill.
Well, when you and I first play paddle, you'll see what I mean about me not being physically gifted. You'll figure that out.
Your position, and that sounds great. Nicola and I
there are 2 really important aspects there, aren't there, around one of them about that just habit building and 1% better every day, and it not being, and therefore making it achievable. But I think the bit that I also just wanted to touch on really briefly is I have this conversation with my husband about children, and our kids being Amazon children. So they're like, can I have something? And it's like, oh, order it, it's there the next day. And actually, I think it's really important to go back to that process, because so much is now instant, or you can get that result or that blood test or something kind of instantly. I think it's also still important to understand the process that goes on behind that, and be quite transparent about the communication on that. But the reason is because I still really want people to value healthcare, because actually, if everything becomes too instant, you don't realize the effort that the people, the businesses, the brands are happening behind the scenes to actually make it a valuable part of life, rather than kind of an instant. So that's just my kind of pick on that process part. I think it's so important.
It's a really good point. I mean, they talk about that, what they call it, the IKEA effect, and something. If you build something yourself, you sort of enjoy it more at the end. And I remember for years I was dying to go to Yosemite National Park, and then when I eventually went there, I foolishly was in. You have to drive there. It's a huge park, and I drove up basically to the best view on a really well-paved road and just arrived at this view. I remember thinking like really sort of, it was such an anticlimactic thing to have not actually like climbed up a mountain to see this. Yeah. So this reframing of health as like a never-ending continuing process is so important, because then you'll enjoy it more and therefore you'll keep doing it. So the adherence, it continues. Whereas it used to be the dated approach. This, well, I want to lose weight, so I'm going to get to this target weight. And of course, what happens to you is a target weight, you go back to where you were before, and then you're on this sort of yo-yo scenario, and so on. Yeah, it's like there was so much evidence to support that that's not the best way to do things. You have to have this sort of process-oriented, or one of the health podcasts, there was somebody talking about their reframing of health goals to health standards, and I think that was quite a powerful way of describing it. It's like there's a line which I just go above, and I try to make sure I'm always above that line, and that doesn't have an end, and you will reach end goals, you will reach certain result goals as a result of that, but you continuously just strive to be above that certain line. And if I look back in sort of when I was best as a sports person, I was probably performed my best when I consider myself, well, as a default, I am this good and I will always do this amount better than, because that's who I am. And I think anyone who's on a health journey, whether they're completely sedentary at this point or already quite advanced, that's probably the more impactful way to think about what they do as a standard as opposed to a goal.
Yeah. George, I'll let you jump in.
So where do you think the world's going on its little wellness journey of health?
Yeah, it's a good point. It's interesting, isn't it? Because like if you'd look back at even like youth culture maybe 10, 15 years ago, I don't think you would have expected that this sort of healthy lifestyle had become a replacement for binge drinking, as it seems to, right? It's like people show off about how healthy they are now as opposed to how drunk they got on the weekend, and that was very different when I was a teenager, and that was not that long ago.
No, my niece
it was maybe a few years, Andrew. I think maybe a few years.
But literally, my niece has started at uni, and she's been to the student union twice and not touched alcohol. I'm like, what?
Freshers week is like a very different thing than it used to be.
We're all showing our age here. Okay.
That's just an amazingly unexpected turn of events, and I have kind of an optimism as to what that means societally, right? And I think the biggest challenge, just as you probably perhaps couldn't have predicted the decline in like tobacco use or smoking, not that long ago, and that suddenly sort of turned the corner. You're like, oh, actually, that's some positive data on that, which you wouldn't have expected to see. The thing which is going the wrong way, and on a global level, has been obesity or any of these cardiometabolic diseases. And my optimism would say that hopefully, if we had the same conversation in 15, 20 years, we'd suddenly be able to go, actually, look, at a certain point, that thing did start to change and go the other way. And I think that would be really great if, these habits that at the moment, younger people are really keen to show off how many times they did yoga or meditated or whatever, that they have a sort of societal level change in the long run. Having a British cynicism around it, you'd think, well, I'm not sure that would come to bear, but if you're being optimistic around it, that'd be amazing if that actually had that sort of level. So, on a societal level, I'd love to see that get more and more ingrained and become the default as opposed to the outlier. And then on a more sort of specific level, to answer your question, George, I would say, like, I often look at this and think, what technologies or expertise did we used to use in elite sport, which you would have never considered had a utility in general life, right? And I've seen that from every kind of supplement. It used to be that taking a protein supplement was a really weird thing to do in normal life, right? Like sports people, we had to buy these still what looked like bodybuilder things of these huge tubs in black plastic, and it was really hard to square that off with like normal people. So like, well, what on earth is that thing that you're taking there? And I've seen all of these become sort of wellnessified or gentrified over the years. I didn't expect to see creatine become a sort of longevity supplement, which it has, and quite good evidence for that in some respects. So this sort of gentrification of these elite sport technologies, and I was thinking about this the other day actually in terms of like what's left. from elite sport that could maybe have some utility in sort of everyday life. And I think there's probably a lot now that's got an opportunity in like biomechanics. So people want to live long, they need to keep moving, and they need to move well. And they're starting to understand the role of kind of weights or resistance training and longevity as being a real key driver. But then after that, you've probably got to, well, how do you move? And what's the technique of how you move? And nowadays, everyone films their own workouts on a quite high-powered camera anyway. I would imagine there's probably some biomechanic video analysis technology, which could become pretty mainstream in amongst the sort of health wearables crowd, or health optimizer crowd, which will start to help people sort of figure out how they move or how they work out, and how they do that with the best technique, not just sort of the the more sort of obvious metrics to measure there as well. But that, truth is, you don't know. I think a lot of this stuff would really taken people by surprise. Making sort of heart rate variability or niche sleep stages a sort of mainstream technology, I think most people would have argued would not have been, the way that things would have gone in general health. One of the companies I've worked quite closely with recently is a real-time hydration tracking wearable, and I think that's really powerful. Many people are chronically somewhat dehydrated, I would say, and they could probably feel a lot better in their daily life if they weren't. So integrating that, I think, would be quite powerful as well. So truth is, who knows? No one ever knows. But there's a few technologies left that still get used in elite sport and have impact, which I think probably have a role to play in everyday health and wellness as well.
Yeah, great. So come on now, we haven't spoken about your new business, so I think we need to just give it a few minutes, because I think people will be interested in it based on what we've just been saying in the last half an hour or so.
I'll happily hit you all with a sales pitch, but no. So my main sort of day-to-day role at the moment is I'm the CEO and co-founder of a business called Stride. Stride, we are effectively a home diagnostics business. So we create a series of diagnostic tests or home testing kits across genomics, microbiome, and bloods. We actually have our own in-house lab, and this is all built from kind of everything I've learned over the last 10 years. So we have a series of home DNA reports, which we can look at around those sort of subclinical health and wellness markers, which I discussed earlier, around how your genetic profile might interact with nutrition choices or exercise choices, stress, sleep, even some factors around skincare in there. And we also have the next product we're launching is gut health microbiome test, where we can look at your gut diversity, but also actually for some key pathogens as well, which people may be harboring. So it's not just a kind of wellness screen, but we will have a diagnostic test in there too. But what I'm interested in really doing here is what I'd call, as the phrase being banded around, medicine 3, so medicine 3.0, which is I'm very, very passionate that health tech businesses like my own, and certainly startups, say, hey, we'll help you optimize your health, unless you're unhealthy. And then they say, oh, you better go to your NHS GP for that. Right? So there's often blood testing companies, hey, buy our test and we'll tell you all about your health. But if anything's out of range, you go, whoa, you better go and burden your NHS GP with this result, because we're not qualified to help you with it. So I'm really keen on building what I call sort of full stack, vertically integrated digital health for certain conditions. So focusing on conditions that we know have a very strong evidence around the role of lifestyle change in supporting a condition. So if you had a underactive thyroid, for example, or if it's fertility or even mental health, we know those very strong places for the rest of holistic functional health, not just the clinical, pharmaceutical and doctor intervention, that will support that condition. So what I'm building here is what I call this kind of functional health medicine 3.0 business, where we take into account all of the good wellness end of the spectrum, so supplementation, screening tests, etc., even non-clinical human expertise. So whether that's nutrition or dietitians, exercise physiologists, behavior change experts, and then we integrate that with laboratory testing, and then follow-on care if you need it for those conditions. So if that's a distance e-pharmacy, pharmaceutical flow, some telehealth support, but where the doctor and the non-clinical functional health experts are all joined up in terms of what you need to do there. So the big vision for Stride is building this medicine 3.0 business where we can offer this kind of fully integrated pathway rather than just be either, a digital front door to primary healthcare or be a screening test, which then just burdens your NHS GP with a load of data that they didn't expect to have to take into account. So in the long run, that's what we're building. Right now, we're live with our these liposomal liquid supplements. We made these compounded liposomal liquid supplements, which are personalised to the individual based off their goal and off their lab tests. And that liposomal liquids are great because they have very, very high bioavailability when it comes to the nutrients in the supplement. So they are better absorbed and they are therefore better utilised to the person. And then we have these lab tests, so our genomic profile and our microbiome test, which is coming soon. And later on, we'll have bloods as well. So we're early days, but it's gone really well so far. People are finding great utility in this, and we've got great customer reviews so far, which is a good sign. But we're hopefully building into an even more sort of bigger ecosystem, digital health ecosystem in the future.
I think that's really important because that's my risk or concern of the consumerization of healthcare and the wellness side is it's creating more fragmentation and naturally it will initially, because we're seeing the shift from the public health services can deliver everything to actually, if we're transparent about it, they've got very limited resources and they can't work in the preventative kind of healthcare in the way that the technology is allowing. And so it does need private investment and private setup. But those need to be completed ecosystems and customer journeys that actually create value, not just, as you say, testing, but it's like, well, what do I do with that information, or what does that add to someone's health journey? So I think whether that's through partnerships or your whole own ecosystem, that's got to be the way that people have start to think of this strategically, that actually it needs to start joining the dots together, not just creating more dots randomly for everyone in their health picture.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. Like, a lot of the promise of digital health has resulted in just placing a bunch of dots for people to figure out how to join them up. So I'm really interested in joining those dots for people. And I think, there is so much theoretical good from a sort of consumer digital health revolution, but in reality, it's very, very hard to make that effective because, the biggest sort of anti-success story is the promise of Babylon health in terms of hey, well, you can speak to a GP really quickly, but of course it's so broad and you couldn't possibly own the secondary care for every possible condition that someone could see a primary physician for. So it's actually what we're trying to do is be quite narrow on the conditions we can offer care for, but where we can offer every part of that value chain, and that's my sort of strategic theory, which we're going after, to say, well, if somebody thinks, feeling pretty tired, maybe I need some better nutrition or a supplement. In the process of doing that, they take some tests. It turns out they've got an underactive thyroid. Instead of just spitting them out into the NHS at that point, can we offer prescription support for that, the telehealth support, but then continue to integrate the testing and the other lifestyle change support alongside that? And I think that's quite powerful. But who knows, where we'll reach. It's very early days yet. But I do think, trying not to be too broad, going very narrow, but at least having that vertical integration. And because we do have our own in-house lab, we can also offer better insights from these diagnostic tests than potentially you could if you were just being sent off to a third-party lab to do their off-the-shelf tests. So that's the bet we're placing. Yeah,
sounds great.
Well, look, I mean, I feel like we could talk all day, but I think we probably have to wrap it at some point.
That's all right.
And that's the value of having really good guests. I think that, in terms of what do we want to get out of today? We've got a former Olympic athlete who won a medal, who has gone on to work in a variety of wellness settings, has been incredibly successful, is inspiring other athletes to go on that journey, as well as understanding what individuals at the end want to get out of it and can deliver it in a safe way, which is really what we're talking about there, around having focus around some prime conditions and being able to go deep to offer really good meaning to results when they come back. So I don't know, Nicola, if you want to add anything else, but Andrew, you've been fantastic. And You've been the first guest actually that's spoken more than Nicola, which is actually quite impressive. Just to add that in there.
I do have a habit of
For the regular listeners, that's impressive to get Nicola to pipe down for 2 minutes.
George, behave yourself. But no, Andrew, like as people may not know, Andrew and I haven't actually met and spoke that much, but it's been fascinating having this conversation. And I've followed you on various channels, and I will continue to. And it'd be really interesting to see where Stride goes, and also the other ventures that you're working with in SportsFirst. As I say, I think it's a really exciting technology time, or like that. The breakdown of the barriers from elite practices into the general public. But it is fragmented at the moment, and it needs players and partners to pull it all together into value offerings that actually make sense for people, that therefore then optimize health and performance going forward, because that's what we're all aiming to do. But thank you so much, Andrew, for your time.
No, thanks, guys. A pleasure to be here, and glad to take the crown in terms of the most talkative guest so far. I'm happy to take that medal.
I tell you what, next week's guest who follows on after this,
they're going to have to up their game.
We're not going to get a word in next week.
Brilliant. Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers, guys. Bye.
That's the end of this week's episode. Thanks again to our kind sponsors, IBSA. Osteoarthritis is the leading cause of pain and disability in the UK. As our bodies age, there is a loss of naturally occurring hyaluronic acid within our joints, which can lead to reduced shock absorption and lubrication. This can contribute to the development of osteoarthritis, resulting in joint pain, stiffness, and difficulty carrying out daily activities, such as going to work and exercising. Synovial HL is a joint injection with the highest concentration of hyaluronic acid available in the UK, effectively restoring hyaluronic acid in the joint. It is scientifically proven to reduce pain and increase joint function, preserving your joint into the future. Synovial HL is injected in a simple procedure which offers an alternative to medication and surgery. If you'd like to find out more, please visit synovial.co.uk for full product information and a list of clinics offering synovial HL injections. Synovial. Move freely, live fully. Disclaimer. The procedure must be carried out by an appropriately trained healthcare professional.